Hey everyone, so this is the latest version. You can ignore scene view up there. That's the old game creation scene I need to redo with this new system. But I wanted to show you where I'm at now. I think I'm at a good place. I had got sidetracked with some code optimization issues that I ultimately decide are not yet needed. It's not required to make the code work, it just would have made it shorter. So last night I decided to push on. So I want to start by from scratch to show the features here. So I just brought in this new scriptable object that's got no data. So the first thing you gotta do is add categories. We got no categories, so we're gonna add a few here. We're gonna add skills. We're gonna add stats. We'll add races. We'll add genders. We'll add classes. Now this is gonna be character classes, not classes in coding. Now, as you see as I go through that, it chooses the category we just created, but you can just switch just by going there. So I'm going to populate these with just some generic things. Let's start with skills. I'm going to click the add new item here. There's a little instruction, names required, so the button will show up once we have a name. So I'm going to add some random skills.
And I think the termite guys have responsibility.
And as you'll see them show up right here as I do it. Alright, now as I add them, they all go down here. Now if you notice, I actually made a spelling error right here. So for the skills, all you have to do is change the name. There's no check to make sure that there's no duplicates here, because this is one thing where I think you likely will not make. I might make a check, but at this point, I'm not going to do that. And let's say I want to get rid of match casting as a skill. I can just delete that. There will be a check to make sure I want to delete it, and I'll delete that right there. So I'm going to add it again, though. We'll go through that later. And we'll go through custom variables in just a bit. I'm going to populate the other groups here, though. Alright, this last one I'm going to add some classes. We're going to do some archer, we'll do a knight, we'll do a bowman, and we'll do a paladin, we'll do a wizard, maybe a cleric, priest, a barbarian. So just a few classes there. And one thing I wanted to point out is that if I try to add barbarian again, it won't let me. So there's that trigger there to make sure you don't accidentally just type this in multiple times. So there you go. And you can also delete categories and rename the category. So if I add a test category right here, I can go here and rename it to be test whatever. And then if I want to name it classes, it won't let me, because again there's already a class or a category named classes, and then I can delete it as well. And if I delete it, it will delete all the references to it. So let's talk about that references to it. When you have a data structure, you're probably going to want to have custom variables. All of these skills and whatnot have a name. And let's go to the classes. We'll work on the classes. They all have a name, so archer, and you can change that to match your archer or whatever you want. And you can add custom variables though. So there's a different bunch of types. You can add simple, there's a float variable, int, boolean, string, game object, texture TD, audio clip. And all of these, I'm going to add more types as I go along, but all of these are just a single item. So you can be like texture 2D. I'm going to call this portrait. Add portrait. And now under each one of these, there's a texture 2D asset called portrait. I can drag in my portrait there, and then later when I'm coding my game, I can call on that portrait right there. I could also go up to, I can change the name if I wanted to do that. So I could be like menu portrait, and change the name, so that's menu portrait. I can change the name without affecting any of the data. This is part of the cool thing about this, is that you can change names if you decide that the name didn't quite work for your structure. Because I know, especially when building a huge RPG or something like that, you're going to have changes down the line. You could also delete it if you want. I'm not going to. We'll just I can't spell portrait. There we go. So we named that portrait again. And I can add more custom variables. So I could say I could add a game object, and I could call this character prefab, and then that's going to show up down the list as a game object. I could add a audio clip and call this death yell, and then I've got an audio clip for the death yell. Now each one of these will have death yell, so assuming that they're going to have different death yells. And then we can go beyond that, and these down here, this is going to be a list of all the different categories you've created. When you create a new category, it will show up here. So I can have a list of skills, and then I can do a list type. And again, I can do all of these list types. And I can choose from any of these, and a single will allow just a single option. So for the skills, I'm going to say a Boolean list and skills. I'm going to call this null skills. This is going to be skills that this character can't learn. So I'm going to add that. Scroll down here. Now you've got a little drop-down box with all the skills that I can just select which ones I want this character to not learn. So I can say, okay, the archer isn't going to be able to learn how to do dancing and jumping, but they can do everything else. And maybe if I go down to the knight null skills, he won't be able to do magic casting or swimming, but he can do everything else, that type of thing. So you can do that. I can go to stats, and now I'll do maybe a float list and call this stat modifications. Perhaps in my game, I'll just make these all 1. And then perhaps the archer will get a little bonus on their accuracy. So I'll multiply their base accuracy by whatever this value is to get the final accuracy value, something like that. So this is going to be a list, and if I add a new stat on the classes, I can just go up here to my stats. I'll add a new item. We'll call this I don't know, experience. Whatever stat you might have, it adds it here. But then when we go back to our classes, that stat's now down here as well, and so I can now populate that value. If I want to delete it, I can just go back to the stats here, go down to experience, delete experience, yes. All the values I've put in for experience will of course disappear, but nothing else will change, and my data structure is perfectly fine. So I'm going to add experience again. I'm also going to add, say, gold. We'll deal with that in a little bit too, so maybe if I remember. Go back to classes. Let's see, we can do races, and we can do a single. I'll call this default race, and add that. Now the default race will be up here, and it's just going to allow me to choose one of the options. That's why it's a single, because it just allows me to choose one of the options. And if I add a different race type, then it would add it here. So let's say I've got dwarf, and I decide that I'm going to get rid of the dwarf race. So I'm going to go back to my races, and I'll go back to dwarf, and I'm going to delete dwarf. It will delete the dwarf, but it will send me a warning here too. And the warning says that this item was referenced as a data single in classes archer, and the value has been reset to 0. So if I go to classes and archer down here, you'll see that the default race is now human. If you delete all of the races, then the default race custom variable itself will be deleted. You'll get a warning about that as well. So that's all that. There's a lot you can do with that. The way you can set these up. You're not limited to the number of references you can have to each type as well. So in my characters again, or in my classes again, I can add another reference to the skills, and this time instead of null skills, I can say default skills, and I'll make that a Boolean list again. So now I have a null skills and a default skills, and I can set those up as I see fit. So I want to show you, I'm hoping that you see the power of this already. Obviously, if you want complete control, you're going to have to write your own classes, but for the most part, I think this setup is pretty flexible for most games, and it doesn't have to be an RPG. You could do any type of game with this, puzzle games, action games, whatever you want. But I also have this thing. Ignore the first-person RPG, but if I bring my data into here, this is sort of a grid, and also excuse the dark text on these boxes. That defaults to that. And I do have an option for GUI skin. I'm actually going to bring in, yeah, we'll do that. So I've got my test. Now you can choose a category, any of your categories that you've chosen here. We're going to choose classes, and that'll show this in the top row, and then in the bottom, on the y-axis, it will show any of your variables. So for this one, we've got character prefabs, and you can select, your robot there. And if you go back to the data editor and you look at classes, Archer, you'll see Robot Kyle is now selected there. Where this really comes in handy, I mean, obviously it's nice to be able to see this in a row, but where this really comes in handy is when you do things like the stat modifications. So now it gives you a big grid of all these, so you can quickly go through and just type in the data you want, and it all gets saved. So it's much faster to edit grids of data like this. And also you have the option for how many repetitions you want in the key text rows and columns. So if you have a really particularly long set like this one, we'll do, this is my previous test classes, and let's see, stat proficiencies. So if you have a longer list, you can adjust the number of repetitions, how often it repeats the key rows. So if you're going through it, you can not forget where you are. And as you go through each go back to that. So you got the single floats, single ints, single booleans, strings, game objects, texture 2D, audio clips, just a single, which again is just going to be a drop down. So this is going to be single test, and you can just choose from the different things available to you. Stat proficiencies, we just looked at that. Ints are going to be ints, booleans, just list of booleans. This is a text, so you can the strings, game object lists, texture 2D lists. They're a little bit bigger because of the size of the texture 2D preview window, and audio clip lists. So I really think that this is kind of cool, and I think it's something that can be pretty powerful, and apparently I have a bug somewhere. I'll have to go through that and figure out what that is. And let me know what you think. I'm going to keep working on this. I'm going to start, I think I'm ready to the point where I can start using it now finally to redo this character creation scene and put it into place and add some helpful tips. Like I think underneath the classes here, I want to have some examples of how to call the classes, or perhaps under Archer, I'll put an example of how to call the data from this Archer, stuff like that. I think that would be valuable, so if you, when you're first starting to use it, you don't have to keep looking it up. You can just reference this and just type it out. So let me know what you think, and have a great day.